Nisaa, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, cool. So I'm obviously South Asian Pakistani female. I qualified in 2018 as a psychotherapist, and I think my journey to kind of help people started way before that.
Okay.
Just kind of like experiences in life, growing up in South Asian community. It was very difficult at times. It was challenging, and I just never found a space to go and get help or feel like I could talk about it to anybody, because everybody would just kind of shut you down or kind of put you in your place as a female.
You mean like mentally?
Yeah,
kind of
mentally, and just with life struggles, like you know, not wanting to go down the stereotypical route of like being a doctor or a lawyer, that kind of stuff. And I just always knew I want to be a voice for people, people that don't really have a voice. So I worked as a healthcare assistant, and then I realised there, I think therapy is where big change happens, and all the patients looked happy when they came out of therapy. So I was like, yeah, I want to do that. So I went to uni, qualified in 2018, and then I just started working in schools, primary school setting. Worked with a lot of South Asian families.
As a counsellor?
I was there as a counsellor. So my role was mental health practitioner, which was a bit challenging anyway because of the word mental. So a lot of families would kind of come in, and obviously it's nerve-wracking anyway being called into school because of your child, and I was there to say, hi, I'm a mental health practitioner and I'm here to help your child, and they were like, no, we don't want that. We don't like this word mental is just not what we talk about.
If anything, we'll go to the imam, not you.
Exactly. We'll pray it away, like we believe in God. And I was kind of like involved in like really challenging conversations,
I can imagine,
and just like really tough like situations where I was like, this is not a bad thing, you know. And I think it's always been a battle in my life, like a battle with my friends and my family to talk about mental health. And then I went into this workspace and it was a battle again. So I've always just known this is tough. This is a tough area. And then once I worked in schools, I realised I think I want to be with adults. I want to be part of an organisation that supports adults. And then I found when I started work there, it was Survivors Manchester. Now we are Survivors. So we're a male organisation to support survivors of sexual violence. And I walked in, and on my interview, like the CEO, Duncan Craig, he knows I'm like obsessed with just trying to get people of different ethnicities to come into the organisation and break their silence, because it's just not there. It's
such a cultural taboo still in our community. Like,
yeah.
One thing is, as you said, the mental health education and conversations and discussions, and then when you bring mental health issues that come from trauma and abuse and sexual abuse, that's a whole different ball game, because it's not to say that these things aren't prevalent or they don't exist or however you want to see it, but it's that they're just so swept under the rug.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the saddest part. I think that's the worst part about it, is that these people are just suffering, and we've got so many people in our community that are suffering and will continue to suffer because we're not coming out and talking about this. Like it's a crime when it happens. It's got nothing to do with anything else. When this happens to you, it's not your fault.
Yeah.
So why do you think that like talking about it is the main way in which we can help like break the stigma? Because obviously we've discussed just now about how like a lot of South Asian communities will immediately hear the word mental and be like, absolutely not, no. So obviously you've got to get past that barrier of actually them hearing the word mental health and then discussing it. But so why do you think the actual conversation is the way to actually get them to be a bit like, okay, let's rethink this. Okay, maybe it's not something that I need to push away.
Yeah, I think conversation is just so powerful. I think conversation opens up, you know, people sharing their stories, people talking about their experiences and the help that they've got, sharing that experience, saying, look, this is what happened to me and I'm okay. I think that opens up so much support anyway, and just hope for people, because when you start talking about things, it starts normalizing it, and it's in your vocabulary naturally, whereas like the word mental, like we were saying before, it's not in the vocabulary, the language.
They're just terrified as soon as they hear that word. They think mental means like you need to be chained up, shackled up in put in straight jacket in the mental hospital, and you should be barking at people and all that kind of stuff. That's what they think.
So
being
true.
mental is, you know,
Honestly.
like uncontrollable behavior, not kind of an everyday state of being that actually looking at someone you might not necessarily see.
Absolutely, you're so right. You got it spot on. And even now, like when you think, like I'm from Pakistan, like back home, I know there's still places like that where
100.
you know people are literally just left in these houses, and I think they're like called crazy houses, and they're just unhelped people, and these are people with like schizophrenia, bipolar. They might just need a bit of medication and they'll be fine, you know. They're just not able to work through what they're going through because it's not diagnosed, it's not talked about. They're just seen as, we can't help them, there's something wrong with them, and we don't need this burden in our life.
I think, like you just said then, I think there's a particular aversion to medication as well. I think we already kind of see that bit with some South Asian communities might opt for more homeopathic remedies for various ailments, whereas when it comes to mental health, when there's not actually something tangible there, that's even more of a case than to be like, oh, well, why would I take this pills when I can just do this or that sort of thing.
It's so true, so true.
So obviously you said like the reason that you wanted to come on this show as well is to appeal to a more like younger audience. Well, not appeal, that's probably the wrong word, but reach out to and engage a younger audience. Why do you think that like actually having those conversations and engaging with a younger generation and breaching this topic then is important?
I've worked now where I've worked at We Are Survivors for, it'll be 3 years in January, and I've tried so hard to reach out to people in the community from older generations. I've tried to reach out to imams, mosques, you know, people to just sit with me and have a conversation, and let's find a way to break this stigma. Let's break this silence in the community. And I've just got nothing. I've got absolutely nothing. And it's upsetting, but it's also something that I think I just have to accept. There's a certain generation that are kind of set in their ways.
Yeah,
you know?
I think, you know what it is? I think set in their ways, definitely. There are some people and certain institutions that definitely are. I think a lot of it is also, like, so from being from the similar community as well, a lot of it is like fear and fear of the unknown, and more importantly, fear of ostracization.
Yeah.
Because if people aren't talking about it, if it's not an established kind of discussion and an accepted discussion, being the first person to do it, people are very, very afraid. And I think that kind of fear resonates much more with the older community than perhaps for the younger generation. People are very afraid to come forward and be like, hey, okay, do you know what, I'm going to take a stance on like sexual abuse, or I'm going to take a stance on mental health education or whatever, because those around them who don't understand it will perceive it as a bad thing. But actually, I think all it takes is like a small number of people, and then you know, they can influence everyone else, you know, like
absolutely, you're
but
right.
that is really, I think, the difficulty in our community is it's just especially when like sexual abuse,
I know
people, because sex in general has such a stigma and such a taboo attached to it. Now you're talking about sexual abuse, that's just unthinkable. Like,
exactly.
and it's, you know, it's embarrassing, it's shameful, and most importantly, we don't have systems and constructs of justice for those kind of things. So then it's the question of, okay, cool, if we sit and we have these conversations and we establish that, okay, there's this, you know, behavior of sexual abuse, what next? How do we hold these people to accountable? You know, we don't have these constructs of you know, excommunication or accountability or rehabilitation, none of that. You know, so it's like, okay, this is not just a conversation, it's an upheaval, you know. We're trying to basically like overturn everything from the core of our society, you know.
I totally get what you mean, and I think there's so much truth in that, because sex, like you said, is just such a taboo subject anyway. And you know, in our community, our culture, it's like no sex before marriage. Like,
and even after marriage, you don't speak about it.
Absolutely.
We come from communities, especially Muslim communities, where it's a kissing scene on TV. You got to turn the channel if your parents are there.
Oh
like,
my God, I know the days and that. Yeah, honestly.
That's how taboo and conservative. And that's not to say whether it's right or wrong in general, but when it comes to things like this, where it's at people's detriment, that's wrong.
Absolutely. And there was something you just said there about the kind of we learn as we go on, and that's so true, because when you think about that and somebody's been abused as a child, that's their first interaction of something sexual, which is so wrong. Shouldn't happen. That's 100. Not the child's fault. It's the adult that's put that on the child, and then they're exposed to this and they grow up thinking that that's okay, or what happened to me was fine, and they don't actually work through the impact that it's had on them, which I can tell you now will be so negative. You know, the amount of people I work with, and it's child abuse, and they grow up with that and they don't break their silence until their adult life, which is quite common, which is pretty, I think, for majority of men. We're saying now, I think it takes a man 20 years to break his silence.
That's
if he's going to
crazy.
break his silence.
Yeah. How do you see kind of like, so it's really interesting that Survivors is a male-centered organization, and I think it's a very important, I think, distinction to make, because obviously there's a lot of work to be done in general with sexual abuse, but I feel like with women in particular, maybe the conversation is a little bit further ahead, because of the power imbalance between men and women. It's a lot more easier to conceive of and conceptualize, whereas with men it's much more difficult. I've seen instances even with my own male friends of sexual harassment where people are just brushing it off, and no one can look at that situation and think that's sexual harassment, but if it was the other way around, it definitely would be.
Absolutely.
So how kind of has that impacted or like what reflection do you have, of being specifically in a male-centered
exactly what you said, really. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of kind of psychoeducation as well around that is sexual violence, that is sexual harassment, that is abuse, because they question it so much. And I think if it doesn't look a certain type of way, they think it's not abuse and it's not good enough. And there's this huge issue with perpetrators and them just being seen as men. I've worked with so many survivors, male survivors, where the perpetrator's been a woman.
And exactly.
Women can hide behind being a woman a little bit,
100.
so it's not seen as abuse, it's not seen as
they take advantage of that kind of inherent power balance.
Absolutely. And it's so wrong. I think anyone can be an abuser, anyone 100. Can be a perpetrator,
100,
and the victim is then just left feeling everything, feeling as if they've done something wrong, feeling as if it was their fault, which I really struggle with, because I just think no child asks for that.
I think as well, because people think of abuse and sexual assault in such a
binary kind of way.
Heteronormative binary way, where obviously in that circumstance the male is going to be the person who is going to be the actor in that sense. So they kind of, because they think of it in such that simplified way, they have such a problem of actually conceptualizing, okay, just because this that isn't happening doesn't mean that assault can't actually occur. Like, it's so much more complex and intricate than that. Like,
absolutely. And I think I've got similar, like you were saying, experiences with friends. I've got people I know who have got married and the relationship's been so toxic. The wife is really quite violent and abusive sexually, mentally, emotionally, and the guy's just kind of sat there taking it, thinking, it's a woman, so she's my wife.
She can't do it to me.
It's not abuse. And it's like, no, you're in an abusive relationship. Like, that is not okay. And it's just this whole concept of how can I be in the abuse? How can I be the abused one? How am I in the abusive relationship?
Yeah, that's crazy.
And I think it really does tie down to like the roles of a man and woman in our community that I've realised I think it's embedded into us, where a man is a provider, a protector. They're there to support the family financially. They're supposed to be strong. The woman is there to take care of everything and, have the children and keep the house clean and calm. So how can the provider struggle? How can the provider suffer?
Gender differences, I think, in our community are very muscular. They're very quite rigid, maybe more so than other communities. And I think in that sense, absolutely, because South Asian men typically do tend to have kind of very strong masculine roles, as in like they are the leader, they are the boss, they are the head of the household.
Big egos.
Massive egos, massive egos.
So that if that's kind of how you're looking at a man and a woman, any man and a woman, it will be very hard to accept, even as the victim yourself, that oh, hang on, this is abuse, I'm a victim.
Absolutely.
So it seems for you've got it difficult in every way. Like, firstly, mental health is difficult, then sexual abuse relating to mental health is difficult, then the fact that it's male-centered, it's kind of you've really chosen
layers
one of the
after
most
layers.
difficult factions.
And I think being a woman as well in
that space,
that space, it's very male dominated. I worked in prisons as well, which was a big thing for me.
Oh, that's crazy.
And I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. I mean, it's so weird to say that, but I think it's made me much a stronger practitioner and gave me such an insight into how, abuse is something that can happen at such an early age, and again, that negative impact in your life can kind of push you into
drive you to I mean, crime
crimes.
is exactly
Yeah.
like I'm so like just a bit of context, like I'm very kind of like I am a baby abolitionist, I would say. Like I don't really believe in prison industrial complexes and
know what
that
you
kind
mean.
of stuff. And there's this thing called strain theory, which is basically strain theory. It basically says that all crime is a result of some kind of like deprivation, or some kind of like
trauma,
essentially. And that is so kind of like interesting to hear you say then, because it's like you said that was such a like strong experience for you as a mental health practitioner, because prisons are rife with these kinds of stories. That's exactly why people are criminals.
Absolutely.
That's exactly why people turn to crime, you know, because they're kind of abused little child to hardened criminal pipeline is so pervasive.
Absolutely.
You know, so it's not just like there's so many levels of the consequence of not having help when you've been abused. You know, we have people, yes, okay, they struggle maybe in their day-to-day lives, but then on the other end of the spectrum, we have people who are literally like, they turn into like criminals. And in a lot of cases as well, those people will perpetuate sexual crimes, you know, like, and it's a very like difficult thing to have to it's a very serious and important thing to have to contend with.
Definitely. And I think that is, you just touched on it there around, you know, that kind of understanding as well around people who are victims of abuse and sexual abuse. There is a percentage that does go on and abuse others, but there's this percentage that's bigger, they don't, but they commit other crimes. And I work with, you know, hearing stories, not just even in prison, but out of prison, in the community, where people were kind of trying to find revenge, trying to get revenge on perpetrators. And when you work with these people and you understand what happened to them by this person, you kind of sit there and think,
how can I even blame you?
Yeah, I get that.
How where do you draw on the lines of justice in that situation?
Exactly. You know? And if anything, as a society, I think there's a part of the society that's failed. You know, sexual abuse victims and rape victims. I think it's definitely the way we've put these people, men and women, into roles, and it's just kind of shoved them into these corners where they feel like, right, if we fall out of this, we're going to be seen as a weirdo. And it's just like, it's all wrong.
A recent public example of this, you remember that Murray, whatever his name is, the Love Island guy, obviously not condoning what he was getting up to.
Do you know who we're talking about?
Murad from...
He was
like a social media commentator, basically.
He was doing really well in terms of, he was basically getting every single person off Love Island to come and talk on his podcast. It was a very big thing. And then he got outed for basically participating in
like
racist sexual play. And then he released another is an apology. I think it was semi-apology video, like, this is what happened, and he said about how he'd actually been abused as a kid. And obviously, again, in this circumstance, we're not condoning what he was getting involved in, but at the same time, it's an example of how someone has been abused as a child and then goes and ends up doing something along those lines like, later on.
As you said, it distorts their entire conceptualization of what sex is and what intimacy is and what it should be, and and for them, they cannot see it outside of that worldview of like abuse, you know, like which is so sad.
It's so sad, and it's really sad that they feel they can't talk about it. I think that's the worst part, because I'm a psychotherapist. I offer therapy where I work, and it's confidential. You know, I'm not going to go out and tell the community. We're not in a space where this is going to be voiced to everybody. This is your space, this is your time, and it's a confidential space for you to feel comfortable to talk about it. And maybe if we kind of get our heads around that and kind of feed that into the new generation, that this is about you, this isn't about what anybody else thinks, and nobody needs to know you're getting the support. You know, we offer it over the phone, so people don't have to come into the office. We can do it everything over the phone, really.
I mean, like, with that in mind, of people maybe being hesitant about coming forward, do you think that maybe that is a concern in the back of some South Asian people's minds in terms of how they're portrayed in like the Western gaze? If we think about South Asian people and mental health, two of the main things that will come to a lot of Western people's mind will be A, terrorism, and B,
child rapists,
grooming gangs.
Those are the two things.
That is so difficult. I always personally, I found that such a difficult like line to to tread between holding our community to account, but then not wanting to validate other people's perception of us as being these, you know, backwards grooming, like, you know, the grooming gang allegations, not wanting to feed them. But it's just, it is very difficult.
Absolutely. And it is, I think when you put it on a scale, like the grooming gangs, it was, you know, put out, and it was something that we didn't stop hearing about, and it was always Asian grooming gangs, Asian. And it's kind of like, we get targeted and then our race is just attached to that naturally.
100.
And then we just get stigmatized for it, we just get stereotyped for it. And I think there is like a huge like misconception that Asian men are groomers and they are abusers, when there's majority that
statistically it's every demographic. Like, I'm sorry, but these gender roles and these kind of things that lead to abuse, they exist universally.
It's got nothing to do
with culture, nothing to do with race.
Not.
That's the kind of line that you have to toe, isn't it? Like, okay, how far can I take this, and how vocal can I be about this without giving outsiders some kind of validation into kind of really perpetuating these stereotypes?
Absolutely. And that's why I think the younger generation, well, my hope is that they're the ones that are going to break that. They're the ones that are kind of sick of it. I mean, I feel like we can see it in the generations.
You know, South Asians they have this deeply ingrained thing where it's like, oh, what will people say, what will people think, like, because that's how we're raised, that's how we're thought to think all the time. And even when it comes to a point where it's at your detriment, you can't shake that mentality, you know, where it's like life and death for some people.
Absolutely.
They would much rather be silent, and that silence can be potentially fatal for them.
Absolutely.
Than to actually come forward and be like, you know what, I will take negative perception so that I can save myself. People don't do those things.
Absolutely. And we mimic what we've seen. There's, you know, a lot of talk now about generational trauma. So it's the trauma that we carry
100.
on our grandparents, our great grandparents, and our parents.
Bears of it.
I always kind of sit there, me and my sister have these conversations, and I'm like, where will it end? You know, because if you go back to our parents, their life was difficult, but then their parents,
they inherited it from theirs.
And if you keep going back, it doesn't stop, you know. So it's kind of like, at this point now, you have to recognize the things you don't agree with or you don't think are healthy.
You don't want to carry forward.
Don't carry forward. And let's not do that. You know, that's something that me and my sister's had a baby. He's one. So me and my first nephew. So it was like, she was talking to me about his mental state and not carrying on things that we've grown up doing. And I was like, that's exactly what we need to do. Like, cut the tie. You know,
I agree. I have the same conversation with people of our generation all the time, because especially like within the South Asian communities, there's so many similar stories, household to household, people to people. So many of my friends can resonate with the same similar things. And it's like, there's a level of it, okay, we need to hold our parents and our guardians to account, but then also there's a level of it where it's like they inherited that, as you were saying. So it's like the cycle actually has to end with us.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of where people like you are very important, because the one way of doing that is to come out and talk and actually actively tackle and combat issues that you're dealing with, because it's not, you're not going to wake up one day and it's gone and it's fixed.
Absolutely.
It's active work that we need to be doing.
It's so true.
And obviously that's why you're here, and that's why you're doing what you're doing. And I think the important thing about, you know, how we're asking, oh, why do we need to talk about it, why is that so important? One big part of it is that validation, and being validated, because when you keep something in and when everyone else around you is keeping it in, it's very easy to believe that it doesn't exist and it's so only happening to you.
So true.
And you're the weirdo, like you were saying, and you're the odd one out, and no one else is going to understand, and no one else can resonate, and no one else can help. But having those conversations, putting yourself out there, realizing there's so many people around you that could relate, and actually there are systems of help in place, and you're not crazy for feeling how you feel. You are completely validated in your experience. That, I think, would encourage more people. Definitely, you know, but you don't know, and you can't experience that unless you come forward.
Absolutely. And knowing that when you do come forward, if you do, it's confidential, you know, nobody needs to know. I think that's one of the things I want to really push, and just say that you can talk about the darkest times in your life and feel safe and feel like it's not going to go anywhere.
Do you mind just telling us again about what We Are Survivors is, and also like how, if anyone's listening and does want to reach out, how they can do so?
Absolutely. So We Are Survivors, we're an organisation to help male survivors of sexual violence. We support men 18 plus, but we also support people from the trans community, non-binary, all that. So we accept anyone who feels comfortable in our setting, and we want to support you in the best way we can. You know, we encourage you to come forward when the time's right for you. What I'll do as well, Carl, is I'll leave you a number, which is a survivor helpline, which is 24 hours. So if anybody is feeling triggered by this or wants to come forward and talk about something, give them a call and have a look at our website, wearesurvivors.org.uk, and just have a browse and see if you feel comfortable and give us a call. I'm there. There's a whole team of us there. There's people from the non-South Asian community. There's people, myself and another practitioner who is from the South Asian community. So we're here. We're just kind of ready for anyone who wants to come forward.